Hello everyone, and welcome to this review. Today we're going to be reviewing Valkyria Chronicles 2 for the PlayStation Portable and Vita. The game was made by Sega and was released in 2010. Well, let's get on with this review. The game's plot takes place 2 years after the events of the first game, because if you've guessed by the game's title, with a 2 in it, this game's a sequel. Anyways, the game takes place 2 years after everything finished with the first game, and now we have a group of unhappy nobles and like-minded racists calling themselves a Gallian's Revolutionary Army, which basically want to cause ethnic cleansing of all Darksons. So a happy story all around. You join Lanciel Military School, you form Class G, you go on practice combat training, and you learn about each member in your squad along the way. The story develops rather slowly at first, but then becomes rather dark much later on. During the middle of the game, you learn more about a noble called Baldwin and his family, who are the leaders of the Gallian Revolutionary Army, and how they go to a village and slaughter a town full of Darkson, just because they're Darkson. I don't want to spoil too much by revealing the game's plot, but the odd thing I noticed about the story is that even though there's essentially a civil war going on, there's a rather relaxed attitude a lot during the game. I understand this is done on purpose, however, because you're meant to be playing a character who doesn't understand the seriousness of the current situation. This is why later on in the game, when certain events happen, your characters act totally surprised and don't understand why anyone would do such actions in order to achieve victory. The characters in this game are a huge mix on if you're going to like them or not. You get a big squad to choose from, and if I'm being honest, you're probably going to pick your favourites, stick them in a group, and probably not touch the rest, because they'll just either get really annoying or they're just flat out awful. The main characters like Zeri and Colette I liked, and Avan was likeable as well. Other squad members such as Marion and Sophia are really good characters too. But then you get characters like Vicky and Reen, and if I'm being totally honest, I just kind of wanted to punch these characters in the face. You get some great characters in the game who interact with each other and other members of the squad, and it works really well and it makes you care about them, but then you just get characters like Vicky and others and you're just like, what the hell is the point of this character aside from really being awful and annoying? The interactions between the main characters is still rather good, and what I liked about the game's characters is that unlike a Michael Bay movie character, these characters actually had character growth and development put into them. At the very start of the game, several characters don't get on with each other, and some are even openly racist, saying that they hate Darksons. However, during the events of the game, these characters evolve and become different people and learn that they have a lot of growing up to do. People who don't get on eventually become friends, people who start off as cowards are completely different by the end of the game, and some characters who act cocky at the start of the very beginning of the game are rather quiet and changed as a person by the very end of it. There are a lot of characters in Class G. They each have had a lot of time and effort put into them, and each has their own side quests, but it really will be a huge case of hit or miss depending on you if you're going to like them or not. I personally found I wasn't very fond of quite a few of them. I liked the main characters and I liked a couple of the side characters, but a lot of the other side characters I personally did not like. I'm going to assume most people looking at this review have played the first game. So long story short, the gameplay is exactly the same with a few new added features which, if I'm honest, I never really ended up using. You have a turn-based system where your side is allowed 8 to 12 moves. You move your characters, and then once your turn is over, the enemy has 8 to 12 turns on its side. The goal is either always total domination, capture all bases, or capture the flag if you want to put it that way, or escort missions. You can use special commands during combat, which you either learn via playing the game and earning medals, or, much later on in the game, you meet Welkin at the store sometimes, who's at the school bookstore, and you buy special commands from him. Combat consists of you running, shooting, moving tanks, selecting which characters are best for each mission, hiding behind sandbags for protection, and because it's a PSP game, you don't have all the functions you did in the first because it's a PSP game. It's not a PlayStation 3 game like the first game. You use the trigger buttons to rotate left and right, and if you want to look up and down, you have to stand still and press either triangle or X to look up and down. Remember, this was a PlayStation Portable game when it was first released. Now, you can buy this game on the Vita, but again, originally, it only was available for the PlayStation Portable. So with that being said, yeah, graphics kinda took a nosedive when you compare it to the first game. I'm not saying the graphics are awful, it's just that in order for the game to work on the PlayStation Portable, the graphics had to take a few steps back when you compare it to the first game, which was very pretty and beautifully portrayed. Now, however, the graphics look rather PlayStation 1-esque, but while still trying to keep the same animation, look, feel and style to the game. The game switches from 2D and 3D models, the story being told through 2D animations, and then the game's combat and battle system being done via the 3D method. I found the graphics ran rather well, and it was extremely rare that I suffered any slowdown during my entire playthrough. The switch from 2D to 3D was done rather well, with the character models in 3D clearly being recognisable to who they were meant to be in their 2D form. I didn't look at a character model in 3D and go, who's that meant to be? Stages are also rather big as well, considering the limit on the PlayStation Portable however, and you can only have 6 members of your squad on the map at any given time. I also noticed that the game was using a close draw system to show stuff. What I mean by this is that a tank on the map is only ever visible when one of your characters comes close near to it and sees it. Once your character moves away from that tank, and the tank is out of sight, it basically becomes invisible again. This is done so that the game's graphics can have enough resources to render other things. However, another side point to note about the game's graphics is that I did notice that the game was recycling stages. Now, as I've mentioned before, it's a PlayStation Portable game, it's only got a certain amount of resources and it only has a certain amount of memory and everything else, but I did find that some levels were just repeats of levels that I'd already done, except that you start at the opposite end of the map this time, or that maybe it would be done in dark rather than daylight. But it was rather annoying finding that I was doing the same map several times at points. I do understand why it was done, I just wish that they had changed things up a little more than what they actually did. The game does a good job of making you believe that this is 2 years after the events of the first game. You meet Alicia and Welkin and find they're now married. You also meet other members of the original game and find out what they're up to now. The military school does make you feel like you're actually at the academy, with constant training and tests and various other stuff going on at campus with the other characters. However, I found there wasn't a feel on the seriousness of the situation. What I mean by this is that the world is essentially going through a civil war, and yet during the game you seem to find time to have class tournaments and convince the girls to put on the skimpiest bikinis you can find and go swimming while all the guys watch. Yet then it can switch and be all serious again and show a town full of dead people, and then go back to a girl wearing what can only be described as a belt as a skirt, saying how cool she thinks flowers are. So the world I'm supposed to believe in this game feels rather mixed at times. I do understand it however, because your character is meant to be doing silly things like this, because they themselves are not meant to understand the seriousness of what's going on in the world around them until much later on in the game when they witness it for themselves firsthand. The presentation of the school is well done, the presentation of the characters in the campus is well done, and the presentation of the environment around you of what's happening with the Gallian Revolutionary Army is well done, and the whole racist point thing going on from the first game is still very well done. It does make you believe that this is the world from what you played in from the first game, but this is now 2 years on. It is very well portrayed. It's just that sometimes I do kind of feel like they do throw the characters being more silly rather than accepting the seriousness of what's actually going on in the world around them. Should you buy Valkyria Chronicles 2? To be honest, it isn't as good as the first game. However, it still is a good game. However, originally you could only get this on the PlayStation 1, and I felt that was a rather crappy move to do because this was done just to push handheld consoles. Square did it with Final Fantasy Crisis Core, and so did a few other developers, and these are only PlayStation portable games unless you emulated them. Thankfully, however, this game was re-released on the PlayStation Store, and you can play it on your Vita if you have one. I believe the game is also playable on a Vita TV if you have one of them as well. The game doesn't cost much, and while the graphics have taken a slight hit, it still is a great game. That being said, when you play the game and get around about 2 hours in, you will notice something. This game was done on a budget, and that budget was clearly kept by Sega. The amount of time the game reuses certain voiced words or reused the same stock photo time and time again was just painful. I swear the amount of time Zeri says honestly and then they reuse the photo with him face palming, it gets old rather quickly. It was even worse with Ivan and the laughing clip or Lottie and the dude voice clip, but again, it is a PlayStation portable game, it was done on a budget, they had limits and limitations that they had to go by, so I can forgive this. For being done on a budget, the game's still a good game, and I still did enjoy this a hell of a lot more than Final Fantasy X Part 2 Empowered Women Edition. The game isn't expensive, and if you're a collector of consoles, handhelds and everything else, and you have a PlayStation Portable, then this game should be in your collection of good games for that handheld. And for anyone out there who has a PlayStation Vita or a Vita TV, then you should be able to get this game fairly cheap. So there's not really any excuse to miss out on a great game. Well, that's the review guys. Thanks for listening, please subscribe and thanks for watching.